Seriously, car. Hi, welcome back to the Ruby Tuesday. I am back in the UK. If you've been watching my channel for any amount of time, you would have seen a cornucopia of content that I did with movies and munchies. You can go and check that out on the channel. Had a great time with him. But now back to your readily scheduled programming, and this time round is Pepsi. Where is my jet? When a 20-year-old attempts to win a fighter jet in a Pepsi sweepstakes, he sets the stage for a David versus Goliath court battle for the history books. Alright, so there's 4 episodes and they range from about 35 minutes to 50 minutes. And the first thing I'm gonna say is I'm so glad that we have a documentary that Netflix have decided to bring somewhat lighter, because so many of their documentaries are serial killers or animal, assaulters or assaulters of any kind. If you've been assaulted, they're probably gonna turn that into a documentary, or if you've been stuck in a rock made of rocks. Here we have a documentary that is really exciting just for the audacity of the story that it's telling, between this kid that saw an advert that said, so many points, you get a jacket, a baseball cap, and at the end of this amazing ad, which really was cementing Pepsi trying to take the lead from Coke, because Coca-Cola was always the lead. Here we have this advert that went, yeah, you know what, we're gonna use this marketing campaign to get us in the lead, and it worked for the most part. They sold so much. But at the end of this advert campaign, this advert was, you can win a Harrier Jet. And that's where one kid looked at that, saw no disclaimer at the bottom, and went, you know what, I'm going to do that. And so what we have is the chronicalization of what spawned as an interesting idea from a kid that had the idea to maybe actually try and do that, to seeing him get involved with someone that he trusts, who maybe has a bit of money, and then it turning on its head to a David versus Goliath story, because obviously Pepsi are going to do whatever they can, because the craft itself is worth $32 million. I would like to say there's a fruition that is somewhat satisfying. It's not as satisfying as I wanted it to be, but the story itself is really entertaining. The thing is, it only needed to be 1 episode. It could have been an hour and a half, max an hour and 10 minutes, 20 minutes. There's a padded episode here. Episode 3 feels like they didn't need to exist at all. There's a few bits of tidbits in episode 3 where they could have put into episode 1 and episode 4, but for the most part it feels very stretched out, especially when you get to that episode 3. Episode 1 introducing the story, episode 2 kind of giving us the players that our young protagonist meets, the people that he brings into his surroundings, and then the documentary goes and follows each of those people, letting us know who they are and why they are important to the story. Now, I think the way it's edited is great. It's set in the 90s. Well, it's set in a retelling of the 90s. And they do this really interesting thing where you have a person talking about what they experience, and then you have an actor play them, and then you have that actor hearing the voice of what is narrated from that person now, dubbed over that person speaking really well. So it gives this kind of weird juxtaposition, or you are being placed in the young person's persona at that time, and I really liked that contrast. I thought it was a really interesting editing technique to be used in documentary style. So the editing itself is quite fun. The way they put it together, it's light, fast, and quite frenetic. They're obviously trying to keep you to be engaged within the story. And I think the story itself is quite engaging, but it's the people that a young kid are involved with, especially one particular relationship that I felt like was the heart of the story. So a kid gets enthralled by a couple of other people that get enthralled by his story. And he gets, I guess he gets taken, well, I wouldn't say used, but he goes on a different path that seemed like a darker path. And then there's a moment of realization where he comes back to this original relationship at the end. And I felt like that was nice that they had that in there, kind of a heart of the story, which works out well. So when you get to the end, you're rooting for these guys to stay and be best friends, and you're not really that concerned with the overall arch, whereas Pepsi, where's my jet? And really, it does feel like Pepsi versus, you know, the underdogs. But what's interesting, you also get to see some interviews from the guys, the marketing campaigns at Pepsi, through the few of the Pepsi peeps, the marketing company that was, you know, hired to create that ad, and their perspective off of it, Obviously, sometimes it's going to be opposite to that, and I think you're going to come up with your own theories on whether you believe that was a legitimate offer. It sounds ridiculous to even think that anyone would believe that you could actually win a Harrier Jet, but when placed in amongst the, oh, you could win all this and this and this, and the Harrier Jet was placed there as well, and this, and there was no kind of subtitle of saying, you know, batteries not included, you know, terms and conditions apply. None of that was in there. So in the light of that, you could understand, well, maybe this is a legit offer, and then never in a million years do they believe anyone could get 7 million credits, because even getting 1 credit does not equate to 1 can, it's a lot. So the story that was there, the overarching story, that is interesting, but at the heart of the story is the relationship, which I liked. But again, I think it needed to be shorter. Could have been a feature rather than 4 episodes. Netflix seem to do this with their documentaries a lot. They draw it out to get as much watch time as possible, which is a little bit annoying. It would have been tight if it was 3 episodes. It would have been even better if it was just a feature that was like an hour and a half. That would have been 3 episodes at half an hour. But just one feature together, no stop and start. You still can have a nicely edited documentary there, beginning, middle, and end. But I still thoroughly enjoyed it. I still think it's well worth your time. One of the better documentaries I've seen recently, somewhat stretched out. Going to give it 3.375 Nicolas Cages out of 5. Let me know your thoughts down below. Have you heard about this story before?
You got one.
It's a very interesting one. Thanks so much for watching, but most of all, until next time, remember, live long and Tuesday.